Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we are talking about road transport and taking a quick look into the crystal ball to see what lies around the corner for this vital mode of transport. Despite the volume and frequency of discussion about the UK's approach to public transport, and specifically rail travel, which continues to absorb huge amounts of public cash, the reality is that, rightly or wrongly, travel by road remains the overwhelmingly most relied upon mode of transport. I say rightly or wrongly because there is a view that for all the convenience of road travel and the improvements made in design and usage, our cars, vans and lorries still remain excessively polluting, expensive and dangerous as a mode of transport. Or is that changing? The move towards electric vehicles is certainly creating perhaps the biggest revolution in motoring's century-old history, rethinking the way we approach car travel and prompting a simultaneous revolution in the infrastructure that supports it. Yet much of this investment relies on networks which remain underfunded and heavily neglected in comparison to many other sectors and parts of the world. So, where are we headed with road transport? Well, to find out and to guide us through the UK's road transport challenges, my guest today is Steve Gooding, Director of the RSE Foundation, long-time observer and driver of UK highways policy and practice, and, in my experience, somebody who normally doesn't tend to sit in the hard shoulder of current debate. So, Steve, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Anthony, good to be here.
Well, Steve, let's start with the politics of road travel. We have a general election coming around the corner this year, and the Prime Minister has already set out his stall in terms of what he describes as reversing the war on motorists. I mean, is he right? Have motorists' needs been overlooked in favour of investment in other forms of public transport?
I think it's fair to say that successive governments, when they look at transport in the round, tend to get drawn to those areas that, whether they like it or not, absorb huge amounts of money. And that's why, again and again, we see transport secretaries being drawn into the endless debate about what to do about the railways, when most of us know that most of our travel is on the road network. But the thing about the road network is, whilst it does absorb and needs to absorb quite a lot of money, it just sort of sits there and carries on working for us. So it doesn't tend to be quite the same political football. That said, we've seen a lot of things in the last 5 and 10 years maybe, of changes in the world of motoring, of additional costs, additional constraints, additional worries about things like air quality and about how on earth we're going to achieve net zero carbon, which can make people think that they are being a bit got at when they're using their cars. And I think that's what's caused the current Prime Minister to have a bit of a think.
Right. Well, we've seen big headlines grabbed over urban traffic curbing schemes such as the go-ahead of London's ULEZ extension and the rejection of Cambridge's congestion charge. I mean, from a policy perspective, is local opinion often hindering progress in terms of the bigger road picture?
I'm not sure that I'd say that local opinion necessarily is hindering progress. What I would say is there's always a balance between what a place is like to live in and what a place is like to function economically, bearing in mind that some of us are coming in and out, we're visiting, we're making deliveries, we're travelling into jobs, we're commuting. I think that many of us, I think a good example is this. I find that many people tell me that they're deeply suspicious of speed cameras, deeply suspicious because they think it's a money-raising thing. But they want one on their road because they don't like the way people drive up and down the road where they live. Same people, same issue, two completely different, irreconcilable opinions. And I think perhaps we're all a bit guilty of that.
Yeah, and I suppose the same with the low traffic networks that have been popping up in some of the big cities. People don't want them near them, but they quite like the idea that that they stop the traffic going by their road. Well,
people don't necessarily want that traffic thundering past their living room or their bedroom window, and that's perfectly understandable. But I think I would also say this. I've chatted with people who found themselves in places where low traffic neighbourhoods are being proposed, and I ask them, I say, did you want to live in a high traffic neighbourhood? No, they don't. But what they don't want also is to feel like their house has been transplanted to the middle of Hampton Court Maze.
Right.
And that's how it's come across to them, that once upon a time, they didn't use the car that much. Perhaps, in one notable case, they live in Islington. They use their car very rarely. But when they do want to use it, they don't want to find they've got to do 5, 6, 7 turns to get from where they live out onto a main road.
Yeah.
And that's what's concerning them. So it's not an everyday trip that was bothering them. It's, has this been explained to you? Is the benefit to you in terms of the improved atmosphere and the ability to get around? These are people who walk and cycle most of the time.
Yeah.
If you can see the benefits, then people will go with the concept.
Yeah. I know these people, Steve. Anyway, let's talk about EVs. Where are we and what's the future? We hear a huge amount about the role that EVs will play in the future of road travel. Not least the zero emissions mandate that comes into force, which we see the large car manufacturers really ensure that at least, I think it's 22% of cars sold are zero emission. Yet, as the RIC Foundation pointed out recently, there are nearly 1 million battery electric cars on the road today. How do you see the EV future?
From where I'm sitting right now, the future does look electric. I think the question that we're all wrestling with is how soon, how conveniently, and how does that fit? How does that future of electric motoring, or to be more accurate, that future of zero tailpipe emission motoring, how does that fit into the transport picture as a whole looking ahead? So if I think about some of the places where people live, some of our cities, I'm thinking Bristol, Bath, Oxford, places like that, maybe there'll be less motoring, maybe there'll be less capacity for road traffic, but that road traffic is much more likely to be zero emission. So we'll be worrying about these percentages. We've always got to be thinking, is the future necessarily going to be quite the same as the past? But when it comes to electric cars, the thing I always observe as someone who is, amongst other things, paid to keep up with the motoring press, there's an endless stream of really attractive cars, and they're going to be available to me next year or the year after. It's always jam tomorrow. And I think a lot of people who are currently thinking it's time to replace the vehicle that they've got are looking at the market and they're thinking, yeah, but I might hang on another year. I might hang on a couple of years. So we've started. I think there's been a lot of coverage of quite how quickly we've gone from zero, frankly, up to the million that you mentioned a moment ago. But that's 1 million out of 30 million. Yeah. We've got a long way to go.
You do a lot of travelling by car, Steve, I think. Have you embraced the EV revolution yourself?
I wouldn't say that I'd embraced it as such. In fact, we published a report this week on my experience. I went out with a colleague here and experienced what it was like to use the public charging network to recharge their car. It's a mixed picture for the driving that I do. And I probably do a bit less driving than you might think, but for the driving that I do and the vehicle I've got, I've been very clear. My car cost £6,500 about 4 years ago, and at the point where there's an electric option that offers me the same sort of convenience for the same sort of money, I'll probably jump ship and go electric. In the meantime, I've had a look at the whole life costs of this thing, and frankly, the embedded carbon in my vehicle means I might as well keep it going for a bit longer, just not drive it all the time.
Yeah. Well, infrastructure is clearly key to EV take-up. Investment to create the charging networks and the charging stations. In January 2024, there were more than 53,600 public charge points available across the UK. That's a 45% increase since the start of 2023. We are on target to meet the government's target of 300,000 charge points by 2030, and whatever that means, because it's open to debate. Does the availability of charging infrastructure, does it worry you in terms of fully embracing of zero tailpipe emissions vehicles?
I think it's important as policy advisors, policy makers even, for us to keep two things clear in our minds. There's how it is and there's how it feels. It's perfectly legitimate for the government, for ministers in this or a future government, to tell me that I don't need to worry because there are hundreds of thousands of public chargers out there. Look, here are the numbers, here's the data, I should relax. But if the last person I chatted with who had an electric car has a horror story about how they pulled up at a charge point, and you said there are how many it is electric chargers available. Well, there aren't. There are that many in existence, and some of them are working and some of them aren't, and some of them have got somebody hooked up to them already and some of them haven't. Some of them are easier to use than others. It's a mixed picture. The analogy I would draw let's hark right back for a minute. The first service station dedicated to the supply of fuel to motor cars in this country opened for business in 1919.
Mm-hmm.
Cars have been around for decades, but that was the first one. It took a while to get to the point where that came into existence. We're at a similarly early stage. I think the conversion, the convenience of charging is going to improve quite rapidly. Whether it will improve rapidly enough to meet the government's ambitions is the question. But I think that just looking at the number of chargers misses a really important point. It's about, do I feel that there will be a charger available when I need it, that will work, that I'll find it really easy to hitch up to.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I have that conversation with, their current feeling is, no, I'm not confident. And that's the thing the government's got to worry about.
And that was a discussion that I had recently on the podcast with Kate Turrell of ChargeSafe. You know, having a charge point is there, but do you feel comfortable about using it? Can you find it? And of course, the technology, the digital and mobile data infrastructure that was required, you know, to let people know where these charge points are, but also for connecting roads and vehicles, whether they are EVs or not, to actually make us actually more efficient in the way we use the road network. I mean, that is key to making our whole road network infrastructure work more effectively. I mean, do you think that is in place or likely to be in place fast enough?
I think it's getting in place to some extent, but I think I rather flippantly compare the quality, the extent of mobile signal coverage in this country bears comparison with Korea. Unfortunately, it's North Korea, not South Korea. And we simply do not have the scale, the quality of connectivity of a place like that. The important thing is, and we're not going to either. So what we need to do is to be designing our motoring world, our vehicle connectivity and our traffic control connectivity systems to cope with the world that we're going to have, not the one that we wished that we had, which is eminently doable. So I would say, yes, we're heading in the right direction because this is increasingly being understood, but it's very, very important that it's widely understood.
Which leads us on to the actual infrastructure on which, you know, all of our vehicles run. You know, building and maintaining the right highway infrastructure is central to road transport. So how would you say that National Highways is getting on in terms of managing the wider strategic network? Has its 5-year RIS plan worked in terms of securing the pipeline of work? You know, and what are the chances of RIS 3 getting over the line for the next 5-year plan?
I think many of us who are in this world are looking at progress on RIS 3 as really something of, it's the acid test of whether this new system that we set up in 2015 is really robust, is really going to function. Is this government, is the next government going to stick with the 5-year funding periods? Are they going to stick with putting enough money into those 5-year funding periods to keep the network in the states to which, frankly, I think we all need it to be socially and economically? I think the jury's out on that. And one of the reasons the jury's out is, of course, we're in difficult economic times. We can't fail to have heard that over the last few days with all the coverage of the budget. But also, there has been a particular squeeze in the last 24 months or more of construction cost inflation, which has particularly caused problems for National Highways. Mm-hmm. So I would say things have been getting more under control from National Highways. They're a bit more control of their own destiny and therefore in securing ours. But what I would say is I very much endorse the approach that the current Chief Executive, Nick Harris, has taken going into RIS 3, which is the balance of attention has got to switch away from enhancement towards the resilience of the existing network.
Right, yeah.
And that's for two reasons. One is about climate resilience and the changing weather patterns we've got and the impact they have. And the other is that a lot of the structures, a lot of the construction of the National Highway network dates back, as do I, to the early 1960s. And just like me, it needs a bit of work to keep it going.
We'll come on to that later on, Steve. But meanwhile, of course, the local road maintenance issue remains it remains a thorny issue, not least given that local roads carry most of our traffic and that local authorities are pretty strapped for cash. Cancellation of the HS2 North apparently freed up 8.3 billion to fix, as the government said, to fix the blight of potholes on roads up and down the country. Is that a reality? Are you seeing that happening?
Well, I am, as people know, I tend to be maybe a little bit sceptical sometimes when grand claims are made. So let's start with the fact that the alarm survey, the survey of what it would actually take to bring the network up to scratch, suggests that more than that would be needed. I'm not going to say that that's definitely the case, but there's a lot of money needed if we were to bring the entire national road network up to the standard that we all would like it to be. £8 billion is a lot of money. That could make a big difference. But what we also got to have in mind here is that a lot of the money that was going to be spent on Highways 2 was going to be spent after 2030. And those of us who've been around a while just want to see what the Chancellor, whoever that turns out to be, this time next year, has to say about it, and whether that turns out to be an extra 8 billion or a substitute 8 billion, or to what extent is this extra money, I'm not sure. But I think there's another challenge here too, which we can't ignore, which is we need to find better ways, better engineering, better chemistry of repairing and sustaining the network, because we're never going to have that 12 or however many billion pounds that the alarm survey says that it would be nice to have. It would be lovely to have, but we'd be foolish to think that that money is going to come through. There are huge competing pressures on whoever becomes the next government. So what we need to do is make sure that every pound that is spent on maintaining the network is a value for money pound.
And the point you made earlier, of course, about building the resilience of the network, because one of the causes of potholes, of course, is the changing climate, colder, warmer, wetter, drier, etc. Let's talk a bit about you, Steve. You took over at the RSC Foundation from Stephen Glaser in 2015 after a 30-year civil service career in transport, most recently as Director General for Roads, Traffic and Local Group at the Department for Transport. You were awarded Companion of the Order of Bath, CB, for public services to transport in 2016. It's fair to say you're an authority on getting from A to B. Why does transport fire you up so much?
Well, one of my bosses used to say that the thing about transport is it affects everybody's life every day. It's fascinating as a subject, but of course it's fascinating because it has real world impacts on people's lives every day. And I think that's always fascinated me, and I know it fascinates a lot of my colleagues.
You're past president of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, fellow of the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation, and we talked about the politics of transport earlier, and it is incredibly central to our lives. But as we approach the general election, what can be done to boost the profile and the influence of infrastructure transport professionals when it comes to political decision making?
Well, I think there are two things here. One is, when I worked at the transport department, one of the things that I felt was we didn't really want transport to be on the front page of the newspaper, because newspapers generally revel in bad news, and that's what goes on the front page. We wanted transport to be in the business pages of work getting done, contracts being awarded, the economy thriving because the transport was right. So that's one thing I would say. Second, I would say I am pleased to have been party to a number of initiatives. There's Generation Logistics. There's an initiative that's currently being brewed up by the Highway Sector Council to engage more people, not just young people, but engage people, perhaps who are mid-career and looking around and thinking what else they might do in their working lives. And I think the key is to get across to them, transport, particularly road transport, has a bit of an image issue. When people think about working on the roads, immediately what springs to mind is somebody in high-vis in the rain, standing next to a hole, looking a bit miserable. And actually, you and I know, the range of roles in our sector is huge. We've already talked about this. The implications of new technology are considerable. The sector desperately needs people who are into data, big data, data science, technology development. There's a huge range of roles, and it's something that positively impacts on everybody's life every day. That's the message we need to get across if we're going to attract the talent that we need.
And of course, you are doing that on a daily basis because you're a visiting professor at the University of West of England Centre for Transport and Society. You're a chair of the Transport Technology Forum. You are a super busy chap, Steve. I've just rattled off quite a few things that you are involved in. How do you relax away from work? I presume it's not all about driving holidays and taking long-distance train journeys.
Well, it's not all about those things. Like most people, I've got family and family commitments. As many people who know me also know, there's a motorcycle parked in the garage, and there's nothing quite like going out for a spin on the motorbike to clear your head and make you feel better about the world.
What are you riding nowadays?
Right at the moment, it's a rather lovely BMW. I'm working my way through the motorcycle marques year by year, eventually getting around to the bikes that my father and I used to dream about when I was discussing them with him back in the 70s.
Presumably, if you've got a BMW, you're into the heated hand grips, the ABS, all the lovely mod cons then.
Up to a point, Lord Copper. My last but one bike was a Harley Davidson Sportster, which had a speedometer, and that was about it. After that was a Triumph, which again was the more retro-looking model. The BM I've got does have some of that stuff, but it's not one of these great cross-country things with a computer and a touch screen and goodness knows what. I don't really want all of that.
As you know, I parked my motorbike up many years ago and went very sensible, much more lightweight two-wheel transport. Let's talk a bit about the future of road transport, just to finish off. Let's dig in a bit more about safety to start with. I mean, roads still kill huge numbers of people. What more should the industry be doing to protect drivers, to protect pedestrians, and to protect workers?
Well, I think that this time I'm going to say there are three things here, and I'll pick up the third of those points you make, first of all, which is a lot of the road risk is related to driving in the course of work or indeed accessing work. But I think it's particularly the case that when people are driving in the course of work, there is a particular responsibility on employers. And frankly, I think it is unforgivable that we don't afford that the same level of importance in our health and safety at work approach as we do to some other risk to employees. It should be main board reportable if someone is involved in, or indeed is at risk of being involved in a road crash that could hurt them or could hurt somebody else. So I think there's work to be done. We're doing something with the Parliamentary Advisory Committee on Transport Safety shortly. We've got an event with them, which is specifically looking at the way that employers can up their game. I would say there are a couple of other very important things. One is it is way past the time when we should have established a road collision investigation branch in this country. We have such things for rail and air and maritime. I had something of a Damascene conversion on this, which people are very well aware of, but I've looked at the facts, I've looked at the economics. We should have that because we need to understand better what could be done better, and we need to do something in particular to help our young drivers. We need to have progressive licensing so that we don't have people passing their test after a relatively short amount of practice and then going out and getting carried away and showing off to their friends, which sadly can sometimes still happen.
Yeah. We spoke also earlier about investment in roads. I mean, the reality is that it's unlikely to be huge amounts of public money available going forward. And besides, Stonehenge Tunnel and Lower Thames Crossing, they've demonstrated how hard it is to get road schemes through planning. I mean, how do you see the future of road transport in the face of this? The possible demise of major projects, due to funding constraints and environmental concerns.
Well, the amount of capacity we add to our national road network in any given year because of enhancement projects is only ever a tiny proportion, a tiny percentage of the total network that we've got. So we have, I can kindly observe, I've been in this field for a long time now, so I can turn back to the Rod Eddington report back in 2005-06. We have a well-developed road network, we have a well-developed rail network. Now, maybe that network can be better managed. Maybe the sort of investment that we need when we're talking about enhancement is about additional capacity on the same line of route. I suspect that if we were having this conversation in the context of, say, the politics and the economics of the late 1970s, early 1980s, we'd be discussing whether the M11 should be dual 3 rather than dual 2. Maybe that will come back round again. But I don't think I see any sign of road transport becoming less important. What I see is its continued importance will be recognised, but it will need to fit into a different way that we organise our cities, our conurbations, different way that we organise our travel, and changes that are bound to come about. We haven't touched on it here, but we need to at least acknowledge it, that might come about through increased automation, which I suspect is going to have more of an impact in the world of logistics and in the world of commercial travel than it will in the world of personal and private transport.
Which for many is a scary prospect. I mean, one of the other issues, which is quite often in the too difficult basket, is road user charging. I mean, fuel duty revenue is already being hit hard by electric vehicles and more efficient engines. Is road user charging as a means to bridge that funding gap, is that still politically too difficult?
Well, the experience that you described of Cambridge not that long ago suggests, well, let's just say it's very politically sensitive. What we've said from the Foundation is there is a prior question. There is nothing written, cast in stone, that says that motoring has to be a net contributor to the exchequer. But if it is the case that the government of the day thinks that should be the case or should continue to be the case, then we need to look at how could that be done in a way that de-risks the approach. And what we've said is probably the most sensible thing is to put a mileage charge onto vehicles that don't consume fossil fuels. And if you have a mileage charge, there are some very simple ways. They're not very exciting. They're not very exciting for the economists because they simply translate what is effectively a distance charge already, because it relates the amount of fuel you burn, into a distance charge that just relates the amount of miles that you travel on the network. And modern vehicles all have an odometer. Yes, some people will try to cheat any system that we come up with, but actually cheating a modern motor vehicle odometer is not a straightforward thing. You can't just twiddle around with the mechanics of it like you used to be able to in the first cars that I owned back in the day. Not that I ever did, I should stress, but these electronic systems are far more complicated. There are ways of doing something relatively straightforward if government chose to do so. The question is, what's the package? What's the deal in the round? If the announcement that the Secretary of State for Transport or the Chancellor made was, hurrah, good news, I'm today introducing road user charging, I don't think they would get much applause. If they're able to say, look, here is my vision for how the transport network is going to work in 5 or 10 years' time, of which a small part is this, and by the way, don't get concerned about it because it's not really much different to what you're already paying by way of the duty on fuel. I think people are being much more relaxed about it.
We started with politics. Let's finish with politics. We've got a general election coming. Where, if any, are the party dividing lines to look out for when it comes to road transport?
Well, I think it's often the case that aside from some very high-profile things like, I think back in 2010 there was a divide over a number of runways at Heathrow Airport, transport delivery, and particularly road transport, doesn't tend to be the stuff of political debate, as you were saying earlier, or even political division. I think that whether railways should be in public ownership or not is always going to be knocking around as a political football, whereas we never sold the roads, and I don't think that anyone's particularly keen on that as an idea. So it's not really a matter of political philosophy. Rather, it's going to come down to a rather more mundane and everyday thing, which is how much could they afford? How much do they want to afford? How much is the road maintenance, the road resilience budget going to be protected against all of the other pressures that we talked about earlier? And I suspect whoever is Chancellor after the next election is going to face that in a very similar way.
So finally, any advice for an incoming Transport Secretary, or as it may turn out, the existing Transport Secretary going forward?
Well, whoever is the Transport Secretary is always going to have people coming around saying you should spend more money on this, more money on that, more money on the other. I would say don't forget quite how important roads are. Without roads, it's really hard to cycle. Without roads, you don't have bus services, you don't have coach services, and you certainly don't have Amazon and UBS and other companies delivering things to our houses that we've got very used to in the last few years. Don't lose sight of that. Think about it. But if you want to spend all your time thinking about how to organise the railway, that's fine. Just make sure that you don't forget to make sure the road network is resilient, despite all of the pressures on it that we've talked about earlier.
They are, of course, central to economic growth. So a great point to end on, Steve. A huge amount for us all to think about there. Roads are certainly going to be part of the transport mix for some time to come. So thanks very much for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Steve. Well, that's all we've got time for today, but we do have more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background and links to some of the issues discussed today and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share with colleagues. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Steve. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.